No cell service. No one gets out.
You're holding the guests hostage in the restaurant.
What do you want?
You're a wealthy man, and we want to know.
What are your daughter's lives worth to you?
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2023 action film The Best Man. The film is co-written and directed by Shane Dax Taylor and it stars Luke Wilson, Dolph Lundgren, Brendan Fair, Nicky Whelan, Scout Taylor-Compton and Scott Martin. Now the film focuses on, initially there is like a group of mercenaries, if you like, who are paid by a wealthy man to get his daughter back as she has been kidnapped. Now in the process of rescuing his daughter, this guy's daughter, some of them get injured, some of them get killed, and they manage to get out alive. The film then jumps to a year later. Luke Wilson's character, who was the leader of this mercenary group, is actually getting married, and he's getting married to the woman that he rescued a year previously with his group. So he's calling on his friends to come to his wedding. The wedding's like in Las Vegas, in like a casino type place. Very lavish affair. And then at the day of the ceremony, it is taken over by a group of terrorists who essentially are going to hold the father hostage with his two daughters so that they can get as much money out of him as humanly possible. However, they didn't count on the fact that this group of mercenaries, Luke Wilson, Dolph Lundgren and Brendan Fair, are going to be at this wedding and they are going to be around to put a stop to this villainy. Right, what are my thoughts on The Best Man? Well, this really is, trying to be a little bit complimentary here, a fairly standard run-of-the-mill action flick. You know, if you like your action films, you know, like with middling budgets, you know, quite small to middling budgets for this type of movie, you know, which is, you could describe this as like a direct-to-streaming DVD, you know, B-movie type thing. It's got a decent amount of production values to it. There's a decent amount of budget added to it. But if you like fairly bog standard like action flicks that don't demand a lot of you and don't do anything original with the formula, then, you know, I mean, this is certainly a very watchable film in that aspect. I think if you're looking for like an action film that's got a real edge, you know, something different, some really top-notch action sequences, characters that you can get behind, then you're probably going to be suitably disappointed with this one, because this doesn't really tick any of them boxes that I've just mentioned. It's a bit of an odd one that kind of, I don't really want to say it because it feels like a cliche these days, but it's like Die Hard at a wedding ceremony, I suppose. But rather than, you know, one John McClane, you've got three. You've got Luke Wilson's character, who's the groom, who, you know, has got to kind of put his mercenary hat on to try and rescue not only his bride, but, you know, some of the wedding guests and all this kind of stuff. And then you've got Dolph Lundgren, who's part of this mercenary crew, who's there, but he's kind of, he's a bit, you know, he's a bit on the edge, living on the edge in a sense of he's drunk most of the time, you know what I mean? So you've got him kind of struggling through to try to help his friend. And then you've got Brendan Fair's character, who I believe is Luke Wilson's cousin in the film, who's at the wedding, who kind of falls for the bridesmaid, who's the sister of the bride. So it's up to these three to essentially work individually and together to try and put a stop to this group of terrorists that have kind of taken over the wedding party. Now, another issue that you do have with this film is it feels very insular, in a sense of, you know, it's supposed to be this lavish. I mean, they do try and explain it away by saying, you know, we'll close the whole casino for you the whole weekend, you know, because the father's very wealthy and all this kind of stuff. So there's nobody else in this casino other than these wedding guests and the terrorists and like these, you know, the Luke Wilson, Dolph Lundgren and Brendan Fair character sort of thing. There's just nobody else. It just feels a little bit odd. And when you see these terrorists kind of ushering these wedding guests around, you're just looking at them and just thinking, they just don't look like wedding guests. They look like they just pulled them off the production crew. Right, we'll have her over there who's making the teas. We'll have him over there. Pull them. Right, we'll get them. They can be wedding guests. Throw anything on them that we can find. It's just odd, you know what I mean? How they're ushering these wedding guests around, and it never really becomes much of an issue to save hostages and all this kind of stuff. And it just kind of loses its direction, if you like, at one point in this film. It just kind of, all the action scenes kind of blend into one, and you're not really sure who they're fighting, how they got in that situation. Now, with a decently made action film, you can forgive a lot of that, really. If the action sequences are done to, a good standard for you to actually, forgive some of the other stuff that I'm talking about, fairly unmemorable characters, for example. There's none of them really memorable. Luke Wilson's character, who's, like I say, the leader of these mercenaries, not forgettable. He's never really been the most charismatic, Luke Wilson. For me, anyway. He's like putting Owen Wilson, his brother, in an action role. It just doesn't sit well. It doesn't work right. He does okay with the part, and he does his best with it, but you never really believe that he's a badass, really. Dolph Lundgren, hey, he's Dolph Lundgren. He's not given nearly enough in this film to do, but if you consider his recent troubles in regards to his battle with cancer and things like that, kind of explainable, I think, in regards to his somewhat reduced role in the film. And it does seem a little bit odd to have Dolph Lundgren here. It's almost like he's the odd man out. He doesn't seem to fit in with the other two, sort of thing. And this Brendan Fair, who essentially gets top billing here, again, he's given a totally unmemorable character, and you just don't believe him in the action sequences either. And don't get me started on the villain. Who the villain is not hard to figure out, and obviously I'm not going to spoil it for you guys. And you could argue at best he plays it up like a pantomime villain, and at worst he's just terrible, really. He's just, again, it's like a computer's just spat out a generic villain and said, that'll do. So, yeah, this is one that is hard to really strongly recommend. If you like, like I say, middling budgets for a B movie, with a decent half decent cast in it, and some acceptable action scenes with an interesting premise that they don't do a great deal with. Again, you could do far worse than this. But for me, I found it a tad disappointing, and, nothing for me to elevate it above the score that I've given it. So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this review. I'll be back with more content on the channel very, very soon.